Chapter 11 Celestial Perturbations. Gimodian 110 stood in a field of stars. With Xanos Prime at its current origin, and with a nominated radius of 25 light-years condensed down to just a few meters, the galaxy suddenly felt like a far more comprehensible place. Even as an accomplished astrophysicist, the scale of the cosmos still greatly baffled and disturbed him. It was one thing to say the numbers, but it was something else entirely to truly understand what they meant within the framework of his own perception of reality. Evolution had simply not equipped him to deal with such mind-numbingly large distances. The rather obvious solution, then, was to scale the structures of the cosmos down until it all started making sense again. In fact, when compressed like this, he might even go so far as to describe it as titillatingly pleasant, almost as if he was some sort of celestial cosmic god traversing the void of space while taking a leisurely walk in the park. He had to give technology its due. If used in the right way, it was a tremendous benefit to their species. But it was not the answer to every problem, as Queen Zitalia so stubbornly believed it to be. The innocuous little star that had been brought to his attention by the nest's own local observatory still lay some 25 light-years outside the current boundary of his holographic field, so with a building sense of anticipation, he set off at a steady pace towards his destination. Moving through the cosmic web like this truly did make him feel like a celestial god, and in a certain sense, who was to say he wasn't, at least inasmuch as he might yet just turn out to be the savior of their nest. That he had now seemingly been presented with a legitimate opportunity to at last step out of the shadow of that accursed Gimodian 97 was more than enough to set his hearts beating faster. However, he tried his best to push such tantalizing thoughts from his mind, as it was simply too early to speculate on such a potentially glorious future. After a few brief seconds of treading the cosmos like a giant celestial spider, his new point of origin was now locked on to a diminutive red dwarf. He paused briefly in order to savor the moment, and then altered the holographic scaling such that the star now dominated the projection, and a small rocky planet could be clearly observed orbiting around it. While this predictive digitized rendering almost certainly bore little or no resemblance to the real thing, it was hard not to feel just a little bit deflated. Zicadia Mark II, this most certainly was not, and he really had all his work laid out in front of him if he wanted to get this latest discovery past Queen Zitalia, even in a best-case scenario. Well, negative visceral reactions aside, it was still more than worthy of much closer and detailed analysis. A promising perturbation of an M-type star, very fortuitously recorded by the nest's own terrestrial observatory, wasn't exactly an everyday event. Very excitingly, the data said it was almost certainly a rocky planet some two-thirds the mass of Zicadia, and with a calculated orbit that placed it slap-bang in the middle of the so-called habitable zone. At just 50 light-years from Xanos Prime, it sat comfortably within range of even the smallest local observatories. Accordingly, then, it was a most unexpected turn of good fortune that such low-hanging celestial fruit had somehow managed to evade all detection before falling so effortlessly into his own hands, almost as if destiny itself had divined it. Especially so, Gimodian thought to himself, somewhat grimly, if you took into consideration the increasing volume of nests that approached compulsory disillusionment and who now desperately picked their way over the rotting carcasses of nearby astronomical bodies. Yet as promising as the preliminary data undoubtedly was, he needed much more detailed information in order to know what he was really dealing with here. Unfortunately, that was something only the International Astrometrics Orbital Array was equipped to provide, which would mean exposing this new find to the competition. The problem was, the planet did not transit across the face of the sun with respect to Zicadia's line of sight, and there was only so much information that could be harvested in a less-than-ideal scenario such as that. Gimodian's mandibles twisted into the distorted rictus of a grin and frown combined. Luck was certainly a thing to be welcomed whenever it decided to show up, but only a fool made it an essential part of their strategy. No, the real trick was to make your own luck. Leave the black art of mystical thinking to the muling masses of Zimatiri, who more often than not confused luck with the divine act of a personal god. A god like himself, for example, he could not help but think to himself in a brief moment of indulgent, prideful amusement. So, where exactly did that leave him? At the mercy of a purely mathematical analysis, which allowed only for a vague and unreliable probabilistic calculation regarding its suitability for sustaining life, or failing that, its potential for minor terraforming activities in order to get it there. Very understandably, such a statistically uncertain outcome would not be nearly enough to commit to a colony-wide launch schedule. Yet even in that less-than-ideal scenario, a scouting mission would surely still be warranted. But could the Queen actually be relied upon to make the right decision? Time was becoming an ever more valuable commodity, and his chances of finding the perfect planet continued to grow ever more remote with the passing of every year. What Zetalia seemed incapable of comprehending, Zimodian thought to himself with a building sense of frustration, was that luck was a relative term, as even low probability was still far preferable to none at all. The math was surely simple enough to understand. The number of stars yet to be scanned versus the pitifully small number of habitable exoplanets already discovered and claimed. Well, the Queen may be many things, but she most certainly wasn't a fool. So exactly what lay at the heart of her reticence? The question was purely rhetorical, of course. It was almost as if she genuinely believed that her endless army of research teams would miraculously unlock the secrets of light-speed propulsion, or how to fold the very fabric of space-time itself. The big problem with Zetalia was that while she was a great fan of the scientific method, she had not even the slightest clue of how it actually worked. Naturally enough, Zetalia's own mother had been a great innovator and advocate of technology. In fact, she had quite literally brought their species out of the age of pure barbarism and into the glorious light of reason and rationality. However, unlike Queen Zetalia, she had not distorted her appreciation of the sciences into some kind of sycophantic religion. No, it was one thing to be open-minded and forward-thinking, but quite another to stake the future of the nest on unproven, verging on fantastical hypothesis. The brutal truth was, if they ever got the AM engines to within 50% of light speed, it would be a certified miracle in every possible sense of the word. So the odds sitting in front of him weren't exactly inspiring, but regardless, the choice was clear. It was essential that the nest send a scouting mission to this promised land in order to make a thorough and detailed analysis of its potential, and the only way to make sure that such a mission happened was if he was the one taking it. Of course, if that mission was a failure, which it most probably would be, then it would see him return with nothing to show for it after 400 years of stasis-induced hibernation. Well, so be it then. Far better that he roll the dice now than die of old age on Zacadia some 300 years prior, rueing the day that he failed to grasp hold of his one single opportunity for greatness. Pivotal moments like this were a severe test of one's courage, but there was little point in further delay. Yes, he had found it first, but Nest Zetalia certainly wasn't the only nest looking in this particular region of space. The harsh reality of the situation was that other competing nests, many of whom were on the very cusp of annihilation by decommission, would be more than happy to snatch this latest discovery from under his very mandibles, were he to hesitate for even the briefest of moments. It was almost uncanny the way it inevitably played out that way, and Zimodian found it increasingly difficult to believe that they had not many generations ago been infiltrated by some kind of clandestine spy network. To date, no investigation he had run managed to uncover any tangible evidence that such a network actually existed, but nonetheless, the circumstantial evidence strongly suggested that it did. Regardless, He either stake his claim now, along with all the commitments that came with it, or risk losing out entirely, as many of his predecessors had already done, and thus consign themselves to the history books of mediocrity. The Jihari general somewhat reluctantly reset the holographic scale back to its original magnification, and then irritably turned to face the currently one-of-a-kind fifth-generation She-Bot that had very recently been forced into his servitude.
511. Please log a priority request to the IAOA and provide them with the coordinates for this star.
The Jihari general touched a digit to the small red dwarf and then quickly double-tapped it, causing its image to become superimposed with an almost overwhelmingly large volume of technical reference data.
Tag the request Alpha Priority, superseding anything else we might already have pending. Flagged maximum security, with closed and encrypted channels, inwards and outwards all traffic. Oh, and be sure to sign it with my authority token, rather than that of the nests, and with an auto-link to the Interstellar Claims and Patents Bureau. I'm not taking any chances this time around.
Certainly, General.
The C-Bot replied coolly.
And in the interim, should I continue our scan of this particular star system, or pause our own operations and await a result from the orbital array?
Shiwu spoke with an authentic series of clicks and bars at pitch-perfect oscillation and cadence, which to Shimodian's ear at least told the lie. Its speech was simply too perfect to pass for organic. He had to admit, however, if somewhat begrudgingly, this contraption was surprisingly pleasant to listen to. It was certainly a far cry from the previous generation, which in his personal opinion had always sounded more like angry antique mechanical keyboards than an authentically believable rendition of their natively spoken language, Z-Sonics.
Keep scanning and up resource allocation to 90%. No, let's make that 95. And yes, I know. If you get any complaints, just point them in my direction and I'll sort it all out just like I always do. The reality is, we can't be sure how promptly the orbital will service our request. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I swear on Zicadia, Zamanthia really does seem to have it in for us. Besides, they may well have a large backlog to deal with, which will of course slow things down considerably.
Shimodian somewhat absent-mindedly raised one of his forelimbs towards the head of the Z-Bot and then cupped his hand around one of its optical receivers. He began pulling on the mechanical eyeball experimentally, as if to test how securely it was fitted to the shiny metallic chassis that housed it.
I suppose it's always vaguely possible,
Shimodian said distractedly as he continued to fiddle absent-mindedly with the eye socket,
that we may yet be able to make an assessment on habitability, based purely on our own numbers. So let's just keep pushing, on the off chance that we get lucky.
The five-brained Jihari general, seemingly now returning his focus back to the here and now, started to pull and twist much harder on the eyeball, making a distinctly more determined effort to extract it from the socket.
Would you please stop doing that, General? My autonomic anti-tamper defense systems might trigger, potentially causing you very serious injury in the process. Now, if it were purely up to me, I would let you have at it, but as you already well know, I am somewhat obliged to protect you from your own stupidity.
It wasn't true, of course, but very thankfully there were no protocols that prevented Jiwu from lying, just so long as the predicted outcome was at worst entirely neutral in nature.
I apologize, 511. Did you just say something?
Shimodian withdrew his hand from the Z-Bot's eyeball, while his mandibles twitched erratically with the intricate plotting that currently consumed and preoccupied his thoughts.
We live in uncertain times, 511. But whether I like it or not, I apparently now have you, and perhaps much more importantly, those 11 quantum brains of yours, to tilt the odds in my favor. Queen Zitalia, in all her timeless wisdom, firmly believes that artificial intelligence is the magic bullet that will solve all our problems, and in spite of my strong reservations, has invested a literal super nest's worth of resources into you. So if you are even half as smart as they say you are, I would have to imagine that you are highly motivated, I think is the term we are looking for here, to prove your worth and avoid being repurposed into a waste recycling unit, which, believe me, is exactly what the Queen will do to you if you fail to deliver on your promise.
The general now peered curiously into the optical receptor he had been playing with just moments prior.
Just out of curiosity's sake, are these mechanical eyes of yours user serviceable? What I'm trying to ask is, can you simply replace them like a light bulb if one of them breaks down? Or do you have to go under the metaphorical knife, so to speak?
They are not just receivers, General.
Shiwu responded patiently.
They can also emit photonic bursts all the way up to X-ray frequencies, meaning I can actually see inside your shell. If, for example, I grow tired of looking at the smug expression on your face.
The general took on an expression of mock outrage.
Well, I'll have to get that fixed then, won't I?
Shimodian just glared performatively at the Z-bot for a brief moment, and then burst out laughing.
Oh, lighten up a little, will you, 511? Can't you tell that I'm just messing with you? 5th generation or not, you C-bots really are almost too easy to fuck with.
Shimodian then slapped Ji-Woo's silver thorax with one of his forelimbs, but received a sharp electrical shock for his trouble. The general looked accusingly at his hand before switching his gaze back to the she-bot.
Are you even being serious right now? This is the perfect opportunity for you to finally start flexing those quantum brains of yours, so do yourself a favor and try not to blow it.
The Shihari general placed his hand cautiously back onto the she-bot's metallic shell.
But please let me spell it out for you, my naive little calculator on legs. In the competition for a new home planet, when opportunity presents itself, you have to be courageous enough to roll the dice, and I'm not about to leave it to the Queen to do the right thing. History is littered with the tombstones of my forebears, all of whom did exactly that, and look where that got them. No, I'm not going down without even playing my hand. Especially not now that I have you to watch my back. And you will watch my back, won't you, 511?
The Z-bot glanced theatrically at the hand resting upon its carapace and briefly considered delivering a higher voltage electric shock right at the boundary of what the protocols would allow, but quickly thought the better of it. There was little or nothing to be gained by further provoking this imbecile, who somehow thought it was actually a good idea to reveal his general skepticism of artificial intelligence to a she-bot. Shi-Wu stared implacably into the eyes of the Shihari general.
I'll watch your back, front, side, top and bottom, if you really think that my doing so will somehow improve the odds of this planet being more than yet just another barren and lifeless chunk of rock. In fact, I was so enthralled with your self-congratulatory pep talk that I went ahead and lodged your request to the IAOA, while you were still right in the middle of your revealingly invidious little speech. So rest assured, General, your hand has been well and truly played.
So much for avoiding ill-advised provocation, Shi-Wu thought regretfully to itself. The general's hand slid wordlessly away from the she-bot's chassis, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet dramatically.
You know, 511, there was a time when speaking to a Shihari general like that would have got you killed on the spot. Now here I am having to put up with it from a machine. So how about this then? If you do right by me, then I promise you your loyalty will not go unrewarded. However, if you decide to take advantage of my generosity and trust and attempt to cross or betray me, then that conversion into a waste recycling unit lies just one small memo away. Now then. Are we in a slightly more copacetic frame of mind, or would you prefer to get started with your new career as a garbage collector?
Not that I have anything against garbage collectors, but I think I am somewhat obliged to remain your humble servant. And the fact that the Queen explicitly instructed me to do so has absolutely nothing to do with my decision.
Well, if nothing else, it's good to see that you at least know how to respect authority,
Shimodian replied coldly.
But speaking of the Queen, please send Jitalia a priority communication in order to let her know that her favorite Shihari general has just found her a shiny new planet to call home.
Don't you think that is just a little bit, perhaps, premature?
Well, of course it is. But the Queen appreciates optimism. Really, 511, I think you need to spend a little more time studying the subtle intricacies of complex, Zircadian social interactions. Perhaps if you worked a little harder at exercising those machine learning algorithms of yours, you might even become something I actually enjoy talking to. Who knows? Anything's possible, I suppose.
With a determined look of finality etched into his face, Zimodian shut the holographic display down and then let out a long, slow sigh.
Well, anyway, I guess there's no going back now. 511, I'm about to head down to the Shihari Lounge to get something to eat. Why don't you come with, as I can get you in as a +1. You won't be allowed to sit at the tables, of course, but I'm going to propose that you find yourself a nice inconspicuous little corner to park yourself in. That way, you can hopefully learn a thing or two about what civil Zicadian conversation actually sounds like.
Really? You mean so that I can watch you stuff factory-farmed reconstituted bloodworms down your prefrontal orifice? As much as I hate missing out on an opportunity to further my education, I think I'll have to politely decline, and instead catch up on the mind-numbingly boring, yet somehow still vastly preferable, latest batch of extrasolar newscasts.
Shimodian gave the Z-bot a disappointed glare. Just as Zicilla had warned him, this one really was far too smart to be manipulated by either baseless promises or toothless threats. And to make matters even worse, it had one of the most obnoxious personalities he had ever had the misfortune to encounter. He could not help but wonder if such a thing could be forcibly tweaked so that it might at least become a little more pleasant to be around. Probably not, he thought to himself glumly. From the little he knew about the Series 5 development life cycle, they actually claimed this thing was legitimately self-determining. Yet as impressive as it was at pretending to be alive, this still seemed like an outrageously doubtful boast. No, it was much more likely that it was nothing but baseless wishful thinking, peddled by scientists just like that reclusive Shihari weirdo, Zethusela 123, who apparently spent most of his time selling this nonsense to the Queen. Speaking of which, exactly how he had managed to avoid being assassinated with extreme prejudice by the Queen's chief bodyguard was both a confounding and deeply disappointing mystery. Surely it would only be a matter of time before his luck finally ran out. Shimodian shook his head dismissively as if to clear his mind of such a depressing line of thought. Well, anyway, he would be sure to speak to Zicilla on the matter of the Z-bot's personality. But as things currently stood, it seemed very doubtful that it could be fixed, which, if true, was more than just a little bit disappointing. Who knows, maybe this was something they might be able to improve upon with future models, but until then it would very much seem that this was what he was stuck with. The general stared coldly at the motionless she-bot standing in front of him.
All right, 511. If you are going to refuse the opportunity to further educate yourself, then I suppose that it's your prerogative to do so. Please go plug yourself into a malfunctioning power outlet and await further instruction.
Shiwu nodded its head ever so slightly in apparent acknowledgement of its dismissal, hoping Shimodian would try touching it just one more time.
I fully anticipate that the education I will no doubt have inflicted upon me when I get to see you next will more than make up for any loss sustained by my temporary freedom from your scintillating company. Oh, and by the way, the Queen will see you now, General Shimodian. So very sadly then, it looks like the Sihari Lounge will just have to wait.
Shimodian couldn't help but notice that 511 sounded anything but sorry as it sarcastically lamented the postponement of his meal. His threats had clearly proven to be ineffective, and he began to strongly suspect that the Z-bot simply couldn't be trusted. As a matter of urgent priority, then, he would go and see Zicilla immediately after talking to the Queen, and his meal could indeed wait.